talk first about auto insurance. So first thing is, if you have a car, you have auto insurance. It's a law that you have to carry that. You should be shopping your policy around about every year because there are always better deals to be had, or hopefully. So check around. You might save yourself several $100s a year on just shopping your policy around once a year. Now, first off, so let's talk about liability. Liability is the base coverage. You have to have liability. That's the law. So the piece of that you need to think about is there are limits to your liability coverage. So coverage, you can have a typical policy with $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, which sounds like a lot. But if there's an accident and it's your fault, property and medical bills can exceed that really quickly. And so later we're going to talk about umbrella policies that cover the gaps in our liability. So just because you have liability coverage, it's not unlimited. And so there's definitely scenarios where your liability insurance on your car can run out. You can exceed the limits of that coverage. And so that's something you definitely need to think about. Liability coverage only covers damage to the other person, doesn't cover any damage to our own vehicle. So that brings us to the next part. You have collision, sometimes called full coverage. Collision is the damage to my vehicle. So collision covers if I get in a wreck, what happened to my vehicle. Now, many collision policies include comprehensive. Comprehensive is that act of God stuff, floods, hail, broken windshields, a tree falls on the car. So the problem with a collision policy is if we just think we have full coverage and you don't check, you can have a gap. If you don't have comprehensive and you get in a hailstorm or you have a flood, collision doesn't cover that. And so it's important to make sure that you have comprehensive coverage to cover all those act of God things on your vehicle. And they usually have separate deductibles. You'll have a collision deductible that could be $200 or $500 or $1,000. And your comprehensive deductible may be different. So it's important to check on those things. Let's talk about homeowners policies for just a second. Your homeowners, you should also shop for your homeowners policy every year. Shop it around, see if you're getting the best rate. Also, if you are getting the best rate, make sure you review your coverages. Because homes appreciate and you can add on and you can have more contents, your policy coverages need to be assessed annually so that you're sure you're covered. You don't want any gaps. We don't want to have a claim and realize that there wasn't enough coverage. And so you want to check those every year. Your homeowner's policy will be written in about one of two ways. It can be written for the market value or the appraised value of the house. In other words, if you had a claim, let's say your house burned down, it was a complete loss, they'll pay you what the market says your house was worth based on its square footage and year it was built and that kind of things. Or you can have a replacement value, which says we'll put the house back. Now, with replacement value, you have to be careful as well because there could be replacement value could be based on when it was built, could be those things. There's a piece called guaranteed replacement value, and guaranteed means that doesn't matter what it costs, doesn't matter what the current costs are for building, it guarantees that your house will be replaced if you have a loss. That's the policy you want. You want replacement value and you want guaranteed replacement value because you don't want to come back and find out, well, I didn't have enough coverage. If I rebuild my house, I'm going to be $100,000 short. So you definitely want replacement value insurance, and you want to make sure it's guaranteed replacement value insurance. Your liability limits are important. Oh, one other note on that before I move on to liability. Make sure you're checking your contents. Your contents of your house can exceed your policy coverage. And so if you have extra things, you have expensive furniture, you have more clothes than a normal person have, typically a person can have $10,000 worth of just their wardrobe. So check your coverage limits as far as the contents, because everything inside your home is also covered under your policy, but you've got to check those amounts. Liability, you are liable for someone that gets hurt on your property or hurt in your home, and so check your liability coverage. That's the place where umbrella coverage comes in that we'll talk about in a minute, is that when the liability runs out, the umbrella picks up, and you don't want to have those gaps in your policy because that can end up costing you money out of your pocket. It can wipe out your investments. If you have a high value collection or certain items that are very valuable, you're going to want to look into a rider or a floater. If you've got a collection or maybe a really valuable piece of jewelry, you're going to want to have that appraised. You're going to want to have a set value on that, and you're going to want to pay for what we call it's a rider. It goes with your homeowners, but it's for that particular item. Contents could cover that, but the problem is if all your contents coverage is eaten up paying for one item or one collection, you don't have the money left over for all the other contents. And so you got to be careful about those really expensive items. Remember, flood damage and act of God stuff is sometimes not covered within your homeowners. So you got to check to make sure that you have a flood policy, because that's separate. If you have a flood, homeowners typically doesn't cover flood. And other damages, like if you have a sewer backup, a lot of homeowners policy don't cover that. Anything in the yard, if there's an underground line or something like that, your homeowners doesn't cover that. So make sure you have coverage for those. You can add those to a lot of homeowners, but flood damage is a separate policy. And so if you're in an area where you could have flood damage, it's important to have that coverage done. Talking for a minute about renter's insurance. If you don't own your home, if you're renting your home or renting an apartment, you've got to have renter's insurance. First of all, it's really cheap. It could be less than $10 a month, but it's super cheap insurance, between $10 and $20 a month. It gives you liability coverage for the same reasons as you have liability coverage in your home. It gives you contents coverage because your landlord's insurance covers the building. It doesn't cover your contents. And so renter's insurance is important for your contents. It's important for your liability coverage.